What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Cricket debut and going over everything you need to know about this phone to help you decide if it's the right one for you. Now, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. But with that being said, let's get into the video. So this phone has a 5.5-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 255, and an aspect ratio of 19.5 by 9. Now, of course, at 5.5 inches, this display is definitely on the smaller side. In fact, much smaller than the average modern smartphone. So if you're doing any kind of content consumption like streaming videos, viewing photos, reading, that sort of thing, that is going to be a significant disadvantage with this phone. In addition to this, the display, despite having the brightness at 100% right now, really isn't that bright. So overall, if you're going to be doing lots of content consumption, if you're going to be on your phone a lot, you might want to keep this in mind because this phone is probably not the best choice for those purposes. That being said, although the phone doesn't look very modern at all, at least the side bezels are decently thin. Now for the front-facing camera right here, we don't have a notch or anything, it's just right here on the bezel. And this camera is 5 megapixels, so we're not getting a super high quality front-facing camera either. For storage, this phone has 32 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion. Definitely not a whole lot here, especially if you're planning on having any decent number of apps. It's really going to add up fast. Now, at least with the microSD card expansion, you'll be able to expand the memory for photos and videos, but still it may or may not be a little bit of a hassle. So if you are more of a power user, if you're planning on having lots of apps or lots of photos and videos on your phone, then I would recommend looking at a device with a little more storage. Now that being said, one good thing about this phone as far as the storage goes is that with this device, we're getting Android 11 Go Edition. So with this phone, the system's going to take up a lot less space than normal. Now with this phone, we don't get wireless charging, which is no surprise at all. But unfortunately, we also don't get a fingerprint scanner or face unlock. So with this phone, unless you don't want any security at all, you're going to have either a password, a pattern, or a PIN. Now for the rear camera right here, we only have one single camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels. But that being said, despite only having a rear camera and no depth sensing camera, we technically still do get portrait mode, so make of that what you will. This is a photo taken with the camera of the phone, and I will say, surprisingly, for what this phone is, it's probably the lowest tier type of phone you can get. The photo actually doesn't look that bad. Now, of course, there are no real features on this phone, so if you're trying to take pictures to keep for social media or something more professional, I wouldn't recommend it. But at the same time, if you just take a photo or two here and there to send to a friend or something like that, then it should be okay. Now, like I said before, this phone does have portrait mode in both the front and rear cameras. But as you can see here, this photo, which was taken with portrait mode, just goes to show that it doesn't really work, which comes at no surprise since this phone doesn't have a depth sensing camera and we know there's no real strong sensor in here. I don't see how portrait mode could work. But at the same time, it is worth pointing out that although it technically, on paper at least, does have portrait mode, you're not going to get the blurred out backgrounds you would expect with this feature. Overall, the camera setup is pretty much what you'd expect from a phone in this price range. Really basic, really bare bones, no real features, and the quality is definitely not up to standards if you want to take photos for professional purposes or even just social media. Really, the only thing I would use this camera for is maybe sending photos to friends and family every now and then. Or if you have something like Snapchat where the quality is pretty much irrelevant. But other than that, if you have any intention of using the camera for social media or anything like that, I would strongly recommend looking at a phone with a better camera. Internally, this phone is getting 2 gigabytes of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A20 processor. Now, I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on the phone, and it came back with a single core score of 130 and a multi-core score of 466. This is not a whole lot of processing power at all. This is really only going to be good for basic activities like sending text messages, making calls, some light web browsing, and some occasional social media use. Now, when it comes to social media, I will caution you, certain apps like Instagram and probably TikTok, I haven't actually tried it out, are going to be real slow and laggy on this phone. So if you're going to be on your phone a lot, especially on that type of app, I would definitely recommend considering a phone with more processing power, because this phone, while it's going to be okay for more normal tasks like sending text messages, making calls, that sort of thing, it's not going to be good for the more complex apps. Now that being said, another thing you can do with this phone is stream videos and listen to music and that sort of thing. But when it comes to video streaming, like I said in the beginning of the video, the display really puts this phone at a disadvantage for that purpose, because the screen just isn't very big and it isn't very good quality, so you're really not going to be able to see as much stuff on it. So depending on what your expectations are, it might not be a very good experience. Now this phone has a 2500 milliamp hour battery, which is not too good either. In fact, this is smaller than the iPhone 12's battery at 2815 milliamp hours, and I thought that battery was small. This one is even worse, and in this day and age, I honestly didn't even know they made batteries this small. So if you have to use your phone a lot throughout the day, and you have a more mobile lifestyle where you may not be near a charger at all times, then I would strongly recommend you look at a different device with better battery life, because this phone, while it's going to be okay for normal light use throughout the day, is definitely not going to hold up to heavy use without being charged at least once in the middle of the day. And as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, it's probably going to start to wear out a lot faster than most phones. So if you don't really care, if you're planning on getting a new phone every year or something like that, then it should be fine. But if you like to get one phone and keep it for a long period of time, then this is probably not going to be the way to go. Now, as far as other features go, this phone pretty much doesn't have any. It also doesn't have NFC, which is not a very big surprise at all. In case you don't know what it is, NFC is the technology behind contactless mobile payment services like Google Pay, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, all that. So if you want to use Google Pay, you're going to have to look for a different phone. But with this phone, since we're not getting NFC, you can't use that feature. So now that we've gone over some of the specs, let's take a closer look at the device itself. Nothing on the left here. On the bottom, we got the microphone and a USB-C port. On the right, we got our power key and our volume keys. On the top of the phone, we got the noise canceling microphone. Honestly, I'm surprised this phone has one. And then we got a 3.5mm headphone jack. On the back of the phone, we got our single camera and the flash. And on the bottom, we got a Cricket logo as well as our speaker. Now this phone does have a real cheap feeling plastic design, but that being said, it feels decently durable. Another thing about this phone that's kind of interesting is the battery compartment actually opens and the battery is removable. In order to open the battery compartment, you're gonna have to pull on this little tab here and the whole back is gonna come off. As you can see, we got the battery in here and the slot for the SIM card, and the slot for the microSD card is right here. I feel like everything about this design is mostly negatives. This makes the phone feel so much flimsier and cheaper, and it's a really old design. There is a good reason most modern smartphones don't have this type of design anymore, but at the same time, I will say there is one advantage of having a removable battery. So remember how I said that when the battery wears out, with this phone, since it has such a small battery, it's going to wear out a lot faster than the average phone. Well, with a removable battery, with a battery setup like this, that disadvantage is kind of negated because you can just replace the battery. I mean, a battery like this is really not that expensive. You can probably pick one up on Amazon or something. And when the battery wears out, instead of tossing the phone and getting a new one, you could simply just go grab a new battery and it'll work just fine. So technically, if you do want to keep the phone for a long period of time and you don't need very many features or anything like that, then it could be okay. But the negative side of having a battery setup like this is that having a removable battery setup opens the phone up to a lot more risk of damage. Water can easily get in there. It's not going to charge nearly as fast as other phones. In fact, I can tell you from experience, this phone took a super long time to charge up. I was charging this phone from 10% before this video, and it took multiple hours to reach full battery. So that really just goes to show, while there is the advantage of being able to easily replace your battery if it ever wears out, there are lots of disadvantages too, and it's really just an old design that makes the phone in general feel a lot cheaper and more flimsy. So in conclusion, my final thoughts about the Cricket debut. Honestly, you really get what you pay for, so I can't criticize it too much. This is a very entry-level phone, but keep this in mind. This phone is really not meant for anything fancy. If you're planning on having lots of apps, if you want to do lots of content consumption, basically if you're going to be on your phone a lot, I would strongly recommend looking for a different device because that's really not what this phone is meant for. This phone is meant for light use, really basic activities like sending text messages, making calls, that sort of thing, occasional web browsing, and maybe some light social media use. And if you have a really basic game like Tetris or Angry Birds or something like that, then it's probably gonna work okay. And you could probably also get away with streaming some YouTube videos here and there, but I wouldn't try to watch Netflix or something like that on here because this phone is probably not gonna handle it too well. Overall, if you really don't need to do a lot with your phone and just wanna have the complete bare bones basics, then for the price, this phone is gonna provide a decent amount of value. But if you have any intention of using the phone for other things, if you're gonna be on your phone a lot, if you wanna take photos, play games, that sort of thing, I would definitely avoid getting this device. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And as always, I will see you in the next video.